Today's video is sponsored by Ground News, of whom more in a bit. As you are probably aware, and you're probably sick of hearing, High Speed 2's London terminus is going to be at Euston. Well, that is, unless High Speed 2 gets cut back even further, in which case it's going to terminate at Old Oak Common. A lot of people have asked why Euston, and why not Paddington, Waterloo, Marylebone, or any of the many other big stations in central London. Well, as it happens, the chaps at High Speed 2 have kindly furnished me with information on all other potential termini. I have referred to this document before. It's the London West Midlands Environmental Statement, Volume 5, and it's an absolute treasure trove of information. There are some real surprises in there. So let's take a butcher's, shall we? There were no fewer than 30 options considered back in January 2009. Euston was one, of course, but there were 3 versions considered. There was one with everything at the same level, one where High Speed 2 would be above the existing railway, and one where it would be below. Old Oak Common was also on there, no surprises there. So was Willesden Junction. Old Oak Common is only a short distance from Willesden Junction, and Willesden is on the West Coast Main Line, which High Speed 2 is intended to supplement. Paddington was under consideration, and I did a video a while back discussing that concept in more detail. Several of the existing termini were also considered. Waterloo, Marylebone, Victoria, Liverpool Street, St Pancras and King's Cross were also on the list. As well as King's Cross, the King's Cross railway lands were on there, and potentially that could have been completely underground or constructed using cut-and-cover methods. Several other major stations were put forward, namely Farringdon, Clapham Junction, Kensington Olympia, and Stratford. 2 possibilities would have put the terminus at Heathrow, in stations described as either a Heathrow hub or a Heathrow Central terminal area. Some more surprising locations included Watford Junction, Tottenham Hale, Cricklewood, Finsbury Park and Camden. Less surprising is Canary Wharf. And then there were some suggestions that range from out-of-the-box thinking to completely bonkers. These are Battersea Power Station, under the Thames, beneath Trafalgar Square, and beneath a Royal Park. You know what else is completely bonkers these days? Everything! That's why I'm glad to be partnered once again with Ground News. Their app and website aggregates the world's news in one place. What makes it so useful when you're dealing with controversial topics like, I don't know, anything to do with railways these days, is that it tells you not only what the story is, but who's telling the story. You can check this out for yourself at ground.news/jago, the link is in the description. So for example, let's take a look at this story on the train strikes in London this April. Instantly, I can access 15 articles that were published on it. Let's have a closer look, shall us? I see that it is mostly being reported on by centrist sources, funded primarily by wealthy individuals. Why don't we compare the coverage? Some outlets claim to have the full list of dates, while others focus on the dispute that caused it. Ground News also has a rather splendid feature. Some stories go almost completely unreported by one side or the other, and their blind spot feed highlights those. All this means that you can cut through the nonsense and get the full story, even the bits that some news outlets don't want you to know about. I would certainly recommend subscribing. It's a service that I'm a big fan of. And here's an idea. If you go to ground.news/jago, you can sign up for less than $1 or £1 a month. Or, better idea yet, you can get 40% off the Vantage subscription, which is what I use. Check out the link in the description, or scan this here QR code, and tell the algorithm to take a hike. Now, where was I? Oh yes, 30 potential stations. Now, this was a long list. To understand these choices, you have to think in terms of what the terminus needed. It had to be a site capable of accommodating, potentially, 18 trains an hour. It had to be cost-effective and feasible from an engineering standpoint. And it had to be practical for onward travel. The existing London termini are a no-brainer because, well, they're railway termini. They are well located and well connected. Ditto Farringdon. Stratford is not so conveniently located, but it has excellent connections for onward travel. And at the time, consideration was being given to regeneration of the area following the 2012 Olympics. King's Cross Railway Lands makes a lot of sense. It's now been redeveloped, but back then it was a largely abandoned area. It was next to King's Cross and St Pancras, which would have given it superb onward connections. And the North London line of the Overground ran past. There was even an abandoned station that could possibly have been reinstated at Maiden Lane. Battersea Power Station was also abandoned, and I think the power station would have made a truly amazing station building. But connections were poor at the time. A railway into Victoria was basically all there was back then. Now there's a branch of the Northern Line, of course. The Royal Parks actually add several possible sites to the list, but since no specific sites are mentioned, it's hard to say how many were under consideration. We can reasonably eliminate Richmond Park, Bushy Park, Greenwich Park, Victoria Tower Gardens and Brompton Cemetery as being either too far out, too poorly connected, too small, or too likely to result in ghosts and/or zombies. So that leaves St James's Park, Hyde Park, Green Park, Regent's Park, Primrose Hill and Kensington Gardens. I reckon NIMBYs would have put paid to St James's Park and Kensington Gardens, and Primrose Hill would be too difficult geographically. The concept of putting it beneath a park sounds crazy, but it would minimise disruption, because there would be far less needing to be demolished. We might say the same of Beneath the Thames, although there would be other engineering challenges vis-à-vis there is a river there. I don't know what the plan is re-Camden, but I suspect it would have involved repurposing some of the old railway buildings there, which at the present time house the Stables Market and various offices. Based on my most recent visit, I don't think that would be much of a loss. Tottenham Hale, Cricklewood and Finsbury Park are odd picks, and all I can think is that it's based on their existing transport connections. Watford Junction is a real wild card, and I guess the idea is that, like Willesden Junction and Camden, it's on the West Coast Main Line. Heathrow, obviously, is an airport, and presumably the station would have used the existing Piccadilly Line and Heathrow Express lines for onward travel. Well, and, aeroplanes. This idea actually had quite a lot of consideration, enough to overwhelm this video, so maybe I'll make a separate video looking at it in more detail in the future. Canary Wharf, in theory, makes sense. It's a major commercial centre, second only to the City of London, and it had the Jubilee Line and the Docklands Light Railway. But 2009 was long before the Elizabeth Line was completed, and it's questionable whether the existing links could have coped with an influx of passengers on top of the enormous numbers of passengers already using them. Clapham Junction is a major station with good onward connections, but those connections are already busy, and it's hard to see how they would cope. Kensington Olympia is an interesting choice. There's a little bit of space, but I don't know if the Overground and the District Line would have enough capacity. The silliest pick for me is Trafalgar Square. Yes, it has good onward links with the Bakerloo, Northern and Piccadilly lines nearby, plus Charing Cross Station. And it is centrally located, that cannot be denied, but I really cannot see a single other advantage to it. That part of London is ludicrously crowded and there are listed buildings everywhere you look. And I don't even want to think about how far down you'd have to go to miss everything that's already underground. After this list was drawn up, it was whittled down. Several choices were abandoned because there wasn't enough space, and building a station would require unacceptable levels of demolition and displacement. Those outside of central London were cut out because they were considered too inconvenient for potential users of HS2 to reach. Canary Wharf and 8 of the central London sites were out because they wouldn't have capacity. Paddington and St Pancras were unsuitable because ground conditions would have made tunnelling difficult, and the station's listed structures would have had to be demolished. St Pancras would have had to be completely closed for rebuilding, which was just not practical with the international traffic. The Royal Parks were rejected because basically it would involve losing one of London's major historic green spaces. The railway lands were also out. Again, ground conditions were poor and there was so much going on with existing tunnels and the Regent's Canal that it was not sensible. Other ideas considered would have been having two smaller termini instead of one big one, a combination terminus and through station, and a combination through station and depot. These didn't really offer any advantages over the one big terminus idea, so they were all quickly abandoned. Euston ended up getting picked almost by process of elimination. It was in central London, it had good onward links, and it was likely going to need to be rebuilt anyway due to capacity issues. Really, there were no easy choices for High Speed 1. When it comes down to it, London is just too crowded. Euston was less the ideal choice and more the least disadvantageous choice. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I would like to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your kind support. You are the cut to my cover. Thanks also to Ground News for sponsoring today's video. Check out the link, ground.news/jago, in the description below, or scan the QR code to get the full picture. And I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.